guys, it is Tristan with Nerdut's Newsstand, and today we're going to take a look at the DCU. I'm going to compare it a little to the MCU, but I want to talk essentially about why the DCEU failed. So, all good movies present themes. Develop that theme throughout the movie, and then let the viewer reflect on such theme. Whether it's good versus evil, or order versus chaos, as in The Dark Knight, power versus wealth in Iron Man, family and brotherhood in something like Thor Ragnarok, or fighting fire with fire in something like Suicide Squad. But for the entirety of the DCEU, we see one theme. That's kind of failure. The DCU was rushed. The DCEU was rushed. That's going to not roll off the tongue well, to say the most. It does not take time to slowly build up a cohesive narrative. Instead, it directly jumps the gun. I personally liked Man of Steel. It was okay. I would say. The end ruined the whole movie, but I liked how the character had become more modernized for current time and for current situations. But due to the choice of director, more on that later, lack of humor, and heavy emphasis on action, resulted in it kind of being one mediocre mess. BVS took away all hope. By taking away all hope from a character that is supposed to embody it, Superman is by definition everything we wish we could be. The literal perfect being, free of all physical limitations. Now, Batman, on the other hand, he made himself. He made himself into the man that he is today, pushed himself to the extremes of human capacity and worked for every ounce that he has. Except, maybe that hefty inheritance. But he is what we could be as compared to what we wish to be. Superman, we should always aim to be. He is supposed to inspire. He embodies everything through values of him being raised on a farm. Won't push his politics or intervene in stuff like governmental policy because he feels it's not his place. Most of all, and most important of all, he provides hope. So, let's talk about why the DCEU failed, and I want to talk specifically near the end about a book I have been reading that is kind of going over the basic cycle of the hero. And I want to talk a little bit in kind of how they show why the MCU did so much better as compared to the DCU. So, first off, too much interference from the production house, thus robbing the directors of their creative freedom. We saw it both with Snyder's Justice League and then, of course, from Suicide Squad by David Ayer. And you kind of most of the movies have that same old beam in the sky climax, right? There was numerous reshoots. There was hasty, and I mean hasty editing, rehiring a trailer company, specifically because a trailer looked so good in Suicide Squad, to edit the entirety of a film. Yeah, that trailer was amazing, but that movie kind of fell from grace, right? So there's also a huge problem, and that is too much deviation from the source material. So much so that the core values of almost each character, I would say each character is twisted. Not just talking about the Holy Trinity, I'm talking about the rushed development of a character like Harley Quinn. We went from Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad loving her puddin' to I am man free in the next sentence. And that doesn't work for a character like Harley Quinn. They're in a hurry to compete with the MCU. That ship has sailed, let that go. I don't think they need to worry about that. Another thing is their creation of basically gods, warrior gods. That's all they were, was warrior gods. They didn't add in enough simplistic things like a slice of life. There was no relationships or friendships really formed. Maybe a little bit, but nothing like we see in the MCU. Add in the sets. The sets, especially in the Snyder era of films, were outrageous. And we'll have more on that here in a minute. So, also, you add in false origin starts, you need to act like with each individual character, like you did with Wonder Woman and Aquaman. You need to act like the viewer has never seen them instead of knows everything about them, and they really messed up there. So they're also obsessed with binaries, and by that I mean mostly gods versus devils in a way, right? Gods versus monsters is a better way to put it. So another thing they should have added in that MCU does a great job of capitalizing on is their mentorship. You need someone in that mentorship role, and we've seen it with Spider-Man and Tony Stark. It really grounds a character and makes you love that character for who they are, for the hero they are, for the mentor they are, and eventually the martyr they are. So not in the comics, not the original characters. But another thing is the lack of relatable characters, because in the comics there is plenty. Take your pick. You can relate and be inspired by all of them, but in the movies you cannot relate to a god. There's also a lack of sacrifice. Even when it is done with Superman, the impact wasn't there like it was with Tony Stark, because it was rushed. It was so rushed, and no one cared. No one cared because they knew he'd come back. Whereas in Tony, you don't. He sacrificed himself for the greater good of humanity, not just for Lois Lane, which is kind of what it felt like with that sacrifice. Another thing they removed from the entirety of the DCU was the lack of Batman's code. I know, Batman not killing is very weird to some people that don't know source material, but it is what separates him from the people that murdered his parents. Not having that, and specifically in BVS, he became a psychotic monster. Basically, in a nutshell, causing Superman's death down the road. So also something I mentioned with Slice of Life was the lack of friendship and relationship. Does anybody honestly, can you say you care about Lois? That's the one relationship we see besides Joker and Harley. I don't care about Lois. It's nothing against Amy Adams. She's a good actress, but I don't care. It's always about the greater narrative. Even comparing somebody like Thor, who is a god, to Superman, who basically was made a god, we see Thor be a lover, a friend, and even have a beer gut and play Fortnite. So you can relate to even a god. Another thing that the DCEU didn't do well as compared to Marvel, where Marvel started out slow also, was their villains. Now, Suicide Squad showed us the humanity in villains, but showed us that power in the hands of somebody that shouldn't have power, specifically Amanda Waller, even though I love Viola Davis in that part, was also evil. It was a missed opportunity to make us feel for super villains, so to speak, but it's all gone. It's all rewritten, right? So I also think there was a lack of good humor. Falling on somebody, Wonder Woman isn't a good humor, in my opinion. They don't have a good character to kind of break up the intensity. I think we need to center in just a little bit here on Zack Snyder, though, being hugely to blame for the situation because of his work on Watchmen and his love for The Dark Knight Returns, two comics put out in 1986 that picked kind of apart that superhero genre. So even making Batman Beyond pessimistic within Dark Knight Returns, calling his Robin soldiers and introducing the idea that Batman's presence alone created costumed villains and supercrime. We see that used every once in a while now today, too, and points to Superman as this dumb government agent who is ignorant and naive. But if this is all you know, and I'm talking about if this is all Zack Snyder knows, this is how you write and frame your narratives. His cynicism worked in Watchmen. Actually, it worked well. I like that movie. It's probably in my top 5 superhero movies. But you can't apply the same cynicism then when you go to work in the DCEU. Everything Snyder did was a deconstruction of a superhero, and not in a good way. But it never started that way. Man of Steel started with the most optimistic lines you can think of, right out of right out of Mark Waid's Birthright, which is fantastic, but he couldn't land that ending. He took optimism and subverted your expectation, or basically made him Superman in name only. So far, literally, from the original character, you can't even recognize him besides his outfit, right? So he deconstructed Superman, making him fail at every single angle along the way, wrestling with his, own mortality, which he shouldn't by that point, making him level Metropolis, allowing countless innocent people to die during the scenes where he's leveling Metropolis. And of course, murder. Of course, murder, snapping someone's neck. Yeah, I would say so. So we can talk about directors. We can talk about writers. We can lay all that out. But I want to talk about fundamentals. And the book I was talking about earlier is Carol S. Pierce. She did an audiobook. I got it from Audible. I love it. The Hero Within. She talks about 6 different pillars of being a superhero, or archetypes, right? And the fact that most go through each one of these. You have innocent, obviously, when you're born or something like that. An orphan, that's pretty self-explanatory. And that leads to the wanderer, looking out and kind of realizing who you are and what you want from this world. And it doesn't stop, but it stops for the DCEU at warrior. You learn to trust your own truths. You learn to believe in your own convictions. And that's where the DCEU stops, as compared to something like the MCU that takes along to 5 and 6, Martyr and Magician, whereas the Magician understands themselves and their place in the universe. Something like Doctor Strange talking, not using force during the original movie, where the DCU had perfect characters to do so. Wonder Woman and especially Superman, to use them being clever or them using their words instead of necessarily their brute warrior force. But most of all, before any of this, any of what I've said, it all comes down to, in my opinion, reality. Hyper stylized sets and dark and gloomy color palettes. God amongst men's. Dark makes people uncomfortable at times. Look at that. Oh boy. The nightmare scene. That was stylized garbage. Straight up garbage. And another thing they don't do, which actually works out well for Marvel, is not relating to real world politics by allegory, like Civil War. Sometimes taking that chance works, and Civil War is fascinating if you use it in a debate type setting. So I think the only thing for them to do is to stop rushing. The most important thing is to return to source material other than Dark Knight Returns, please. And then make beloved characters with good storytelling and use all 6 facets of that archetype of superheroes telling. Whereas in the MCU, you have a lot of really good magicians. And unfortunately, in the DCEU, you really only have warriors, and not even just warriors. They're godly warriors. You have gods amongst men. Make them relatable, and there's 1,000 ways to do it. So hopefully they fix this mistake. With the Flashpoint movie, I wouldn't, kind of guess that they probably will. But then again, you never know. But it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. The DCEU is a failure right now. Let's see if they can fix it. So let me know what you guys think this issue is. Think it's more on the lines of having the time to span out, having, the Marvel formula, having a way to look at the DCU and make them actual characters as compared to gods. Let me know. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.